type conversions are just a normal part of programming because we have this concept of types, and sometimes we want to be able to switch between them because they do different things. As a great example, we just saw the fact that text can't be done. We can't do math on text. We can do stuff with text, certainly, but the plus operator does concatenation. You can't do exponential with it. You can't divide it. You can't subtract it, and it doesn't actually use them as numbers. They're just text. So remember, we have currently 3 data types, right? We have integer with numbers like 42 or -3 or something. We have the float. So 3.14 or 2.71 or -1.0001. That was supposed to be a negative. And then we have string. And strings can be all letters, capital or lowercase. Strings, which is what happened in the last problem, can contain the characters 1 and 2. Those are technically just characters. Could even write a floating point number, and I'm using the single quote now like I should have been, 3.14, but that's actually a string. That is not a float. We have to convert if we want to float. And so that's the process of data conversion or type conversion. It converts one data type to another so we can do something with it. And then again, we saw with input that it returns text, but we really wanted a number. And so there are functions, and I mentioned them already, but let's actually do some examples. So integer. There's a function integer. Which takes some expression. So for example, integer, and then 3.14. Well, remember, this is going to do what the floor division does in a sense, that it is going to drop the decimal point. Doesn't round, it drops it, floors it. So even 3.9, in fact, let's do that. 3.99 is going to drop it to a 3. It's just string 3.99. Don't do that. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Let's do string 3. Also gives us a 3, right? Don't do 3.99 as a string, though, and try to turn it to an int. I'll show you what happens a little later. Then we just said there's a float, which also takes some expression. And if I take an integer, it's going to turn that integer directly into a float. And if I give it a string, and turn it into a float. If I give it a string that's an integer, float. I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to do this. If you pass in a floating point number as a string and you say, make this an integer, it's not going to like it. It's really not going to like it. It just doesn't want to do it. So we can take all those different kinds of things and do those conversions. We can convert one type of number to another type of number. We can convert a string into a number. We can convert either one. Another example of something that would be bad. What if I put in the string 1? Now, you and I know what that means. But the computer is going to, Python interpreter, I specifically, is going to say, no, that's not something you should do. Same thing would happen if you did int 1. Doesn't know how to do that, right? It doesn't mean anything. That's not a number, that's text. It needs actual digit characters. So it has no idea how to convert that text into a float. So you'll get an error. In fact, That's fun. Let me close that. That's a fun one to do. Let's just do, in fact, let's just do it. If I type in float 1, oops, could not convert string to float. Float 1, on the other hand, works fine. Same with integers. Int 3, or even int 3.14, but int 3.99, no, it's because it doesn't, it's not a base 10 numbers what it's saying, because it has a decimal point. So it won't let you do it. It doesn't like to convert things it doesn't understand. It expects you to kind of understand what's going on right there. And if you pass something incorrectly, it is definitely going to say no. So what about converting numbers to strings? Should be able to do that. We can go one way, we should be able to go the other way. And the answer is yes, we can. There's a method called str, string, that takes an expression and it's going to convert it to a string. So if I give it the number str of 3, I'm going to get a string 3. I'm probably never going to break my habit of the double single quote things. Just know that's what I mean, though. 3.14 is going to give us the string 3.14. So we can convert between, this is only 3 data types we've looked at so far, but we can convert between any of them as long as we're consistent in our representations. For example, that is not a number, and that is not an integer. So you need to be careful of those representations. And there's something interesting that happens in Python that we can actually figure out what's going on a little bit. So my int 42, my float 3.14, my string hello, and I can print all those out. We know what they're going to print. But there's another function called type. It's not a conversion function, but it is pretty informative. And it's actually going to tell us what the type is of, let's say, my integer. I'm passing in a current variable. It's saying, oh, that's a class int. Don't worry about what the class means, but really it's just kind of a classification as far as we're concerned, or a category. It's an integer. So then I can do type of my float. And that's class float, or type of my str, a type stir. I can even pass in literals, which is the number itself or the string itself. And it's still telling me they're types. We can do conversions, as I said, from floats to strings. And remember, if you just print it out, notice it puts the quote around it, whereas the float itself was actually a floating point number. And so it's a common thing for us to actually do these conversions in programming, especially when we're dealing with user input. The user is always going to communicate in text, because the users and humans really only understand text, and the things that talk to users only move through text. And so understanding and using conversions helps us along the way for being able to move between things and being able to do the stuff that we want to do.